amount of comments in the media space. It illustrates global dehumanization processes in Ukraine. We also noted a statement by U.S. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who on June 23rd noted that the reaction abroad, overseas, within the scope of responsibility of the U.S. metropole would have been totally different if Russia, using a Russian satellite, I quote her, had fired cluster munitions on a Florida beach. Nothing surprising to this. Maybe the Congresswoman may be unaware of the declaration of the DOS declarations, who said that not everything from the UN Security Council is to be fulfilled. If I translate this, that would mean what is of benefit to the United States and its allies, they will fulfill. If it is of no benefit to them, they will not fulfill this. If it is of benefit to somebody else, that would not be a reason sufficient for the United States to make this provision mandatory for them. Maybe the U.S. Congress is unaware, but the statements were made by the officials of the United States with regard to the so-called International Criminal Court, the so-called court, when Washington clearly described its attitude to this entity. Whenever this entity decides against U.S. interests or its allies, then the United States would take steps against the International Criminal Court. If the ICC dared take any steps against the United States of America, maybe they would fire a couple of missiles against it too. That's what I'm talking about. It is beyond double standards. It is the primacy of arbitrariness and attitude to lawfulness. The Russian law enforcement agencies are carefully recording the crimes of Ukrainian neo-Nazis. Those involved are being identified and brought to justice. A couple more words on the punishment. The courts of the Russian Federation, on the basis of evidence from the Russian Investigative Committee, continue to pass sentences on Ukrainian neo-Nazis who have committed grave crimes against civilians. To give you a case in point, 27 years in prison were given to Ukrainian National Guard militant Karol, who fired on a civilian car with two civilians in Mariupol on March 14, 2022. As a result of this, people died right on the spot. 5 years of prison were given to the citizen of Ukraine, Grudnenko, who planned a terrorist attack in the locality of Tokmak in Zaporizhia region. It was identified that in the spring of 2023, he was collecting information about the deployment of Russian troops in Tokmak, and in May 2023, he was given the coordinates with a hidden improvised explosive device. Using his experiences in the armed forces of Ukraine, he identified 3 facilities where servicemen were stationed to carry out a terrorist attack. Fortunately, thanks to the coordinated actions of the Russian law enforcement agencies, he was unable to carry out his plan. These are just several examples. I would like to use this occasion, since we are here at the St. Petersburg International Legal Forum, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation and gratitude to our law enforcement specialists in all our agencies, departments and ministries who are doing this difficult work in the context of hostilities. They collect evidence, facts, the field sites, they stay at these sites in order for this feeling of impunity to be punished and to show to everyone that as we discuss legal perspective on the actions of the Ukrainian regime, it is the work in progress which is they are working on the future outcomes, but they are also working on the current aspects with tangible results. We also follow reports in the Western media and discussions that the so-called political scientific fora, another trend or narrative as it is often described in the West, a new trend which has not yet been discussed previously. The essence thereof follows. Now and then we would hear about the plans of the Kiev regime to organize against on the eve of the NATO summit on the 8th to the 9th of July, another counter-offensive. The previous counter-offensive was just a failure for the Kiev regime, but similarly all the money is been given. They have received the order, and now as we approach the American election, US Democrats need some facts, at the very least, to support their project, the Kiev regime, to keep the topic afloat. Those in the bunker do not take into account the fact that the outcomes of this reckless operation may be even more tragic in comparison to the previous reckless operation in the summer 2023. Now everything is at stake. The Kiev regime wants to demonstrate to its masters that junta is ready to resist, and for this sake they would be ready to send tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians, everyone they can find and this is also important for the White House, in order to add this to the election campaign of Biden. In his foreign policy, he put stakes on the Ukraine project. What else is there for him to produce? I thought we had simultaneous interpreting. We are speaking in Russian here, colleagues. For the foreign political track, the Biden administration has nothing to offer or produce. Look at the Middle Eastern context. Look at other regions or situations. Maybe the EU is applauding to what the so-called allies from the US made to them, but this is something we will discuss further. There have been a lot of questions before the briefing, and there are self-explanatory figures. The US foreign policy is a failure everywhere, unless we take into account waves of chaos. If it is their achievement, then yes, they are totally successful. There is more chaos in the world, but Obama, representing liberal Democrats, used to say some 7 years ago that the world is more predictable and safe. Now we see how safe and predictable it is. On the 23rd of June, the Philadelphia Inquirer published an interview of the head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, Kirill Budanov, who rejects peace talks and calls for escalation of the conflict and acts of international terrorism. He said that the Kiev regime allegedly has no choice but to return what had been occupied, and I quote him. All this, again, confirms that the Zelensky regime and its Western supervisors do not care the least about the fate of Ukraine or its inhabitants. They don't care about the sufferings of their citizens who will bear all the burdens of such an escalation. I don't know what to prioritize here. Let me just enumerate. All this represents pieces of one picture: the destroyed Ukrainian statehood, gutted economy, industry, production, the territory that was previously called Ukraine, killed by the Kiev regime. I don't know what figure to adduce. They are simply committing genocide against their own people. And to add to this tragedy, there is one more. I'm talking about multi-million, multi-billion loans that Zelensky took for the future of those who will live in Ukraine. I mean, it is the money that would have to be repaid. Not a single cent has been given for free. They are now either taking land, national economic facilities, or industrial enterprises. I'm not talking about the modern Ukraine. I'm talking about its Soviet past. Or they are giving money on the pledge of future repayments. Now, while committing genocide against their own people, Zelensky is also adding to these colossal obligations should people live in this territory. There is no future for them. I mean, the repayments would be like tributes. These are not loan repayments. This is the tribute for the people, for the nation to pay. What kind of bright future is this? All this for the sake of somebody in the White House to become wealthier or to extend their mandate for God knows how many days, or for someone from the Western elite, self-proclaimed elite, by the way, for their own prosperity and well-being, and of course for their own belonging to these global elites, illusionary belonging to these elites. Now we describe the developments there with regard to the financial situation. The arms for the Kiev regime, that is now the world's biggest importer, these arms are becoming more and more expensive. On the 16th of June, Sunday Times interview was published an interview with the former director of Defense Procurement Agency, Ukrainian Defense Ministry, created in 2022, Vladimir Pikuzo. With the increased needs of the armed forces of Ukraine, intermediaries are actively profiting from Ukraine, in addition to the tragedy currently faced by the Ukrainian people. This is all based on the money. A round of the Grad MLRS system has risen in Ukraine over the past 2 years from $1,000 to $6,000.
For 125 millimeter projectile now costs about $7. He also said, Mr. Pikuza, that in order to change the situation, Ukraine will be compelled to spend, and I quote, 3 or 4 times higher than the defense budget. Can you guess what country? Of course, it's not Ukraine. China. And that is amid the fact that China, in terms of economy, is one of the global leaders. And let me remind you what is defense budget represents. It's $200 billion. The dismissed official, Mr. Pikuza, confesses, and I quote, corruption in Ukraine is an ally in purchases of weapons in third countries. There are no words. I'm speechless. I want to find some explanation, but I think they're in such an impasse by themselves. They do not need any masks. They reached the end. But let me once again reiterate, and I quote once again, corruption, following the words of Mr. Podolyak, is an ally in purchases of weapons in third countries. As he said, sometimes we make the things which is banned by its own legislation. Hopefully that Mr. Assange is liberated from prison. This man who is persecuted everywhere who stayed in prison in Ecuador embassies, and then he was kept for 5 years in prison of the United Kingdom in terrible conditions. But even the West, the special rapporteurs of the United Nations, said that these were tortures. So why this person suffered for so many years? He suffered for making possible and for making available the truth, the true information to the public, which revealed the nature of the same ventures on tortures, weapons supplies, and occupation of the sovereign states. I mean, the United States occupied Iraq, along with its coalition led by the United Kingdom. And this person was persecuted by the so-called Western justice for many years. Right now, the Kiev regime directly confesses, that it commits the crimes with speculations and fakes in trade in arms at the global level. Have you heard any US official or the International Criminal Court who made this puzzle, make up this puzzle? Not to mention about all these speculations, in particular Iraq, in all these speculations, none was held responsible. I mean, the US official or military official was held responsible to anywhere. These were some local cases when the United Kingdom military tortured the local population, and it was made available to public thanks to Assange. I think these are not comparable things. These are deadly conditions in American prisons when they tortured all those who came from Middle East or Northern Africa. Back then, these local cases, individual cases. But as for the global changes of life through destruction of countries, sovereign and independent, that led and claimed deaths, for example, in Iraq, these are about 500,000 million of civilians died in Iraq, and no one was held responsible. And the United Kingdom just once said, "We admit that there was a pretext, and we have not chosen the right pretext." In other words, they did something wrong. Here we see direct confessions of officials in Ukraine that the corruption, including corruption with manipulations with weapons, trade in weapons, by the man who was the head of the Kiev regime, or the leaders of the Kiev regime. This was a state policy for many years, and there was no response. That today's Ukraine has become a rotten state which contaminates with its corruption plague all other countries. I think we should talk about this at the relevant platforms. Mutually beneficial cooperation must be understandable to the overwhelming majority. And I think that this cooperation with the Kiev regime will do harm, because no one can count all the many myriads of promises broken. Just make money. I mean, the weapon barons all across the world. And I think right now they feel the masters of the world. And I would like to remind you that all this Kiev corruption, that is made with the money of ordinary taxpayers, honest taxpayers, private companies who are just sponsors. These are money of the taxpayers. And not the US taxpayers, but the EU taxpayers as well, without any consent to this. We are significantly scared for the security of navigation in the Black Sea, who deliberately mine its coastal areas, and the American journalists are being concerned about this fact. On the 24th June, the Wall Street Journal released an article which said that the Ukrainian armed forces use plastic mines, which are hard to detect by the onboard equipment, while the Kiev regime invites the international community to business, encourages supplies in Ukraine and in the Black Sea. For these mines, they use Sea Baby drones. From day one of the military operation, Ukraine has already started mining. And then, back then, all these mines drifted. I think these mines do not have artificial intelligence. Then they would understand that they need to go somewhere to Russia. But unfortunately, they were located near the coastline of Turkey, Bulgaria. I think that this will be the same case this time. But who thinks about this? Of course, no one. If they get such a present in the high tourist season, then they will think about it. Now about mobilization in Ukraine, which is being waged there. The procedure of updating of the information, personal information of the conscripts is being continued with the timeline July 16th. Up to date, 2,003,000 people have already done so, and about 1.1 million were admitted as available to military service. It means that they should not become just soldiers to defend their countries and interests, but to the tombs, right to the tombs they will be sent. So what else does it mean? It means that the Ukrainians don't have any possibility to contest such a decision. Of course, you can say that they can appeal to the court, but within the last 8 months, no judicial proceeding against the military commissariats has been won by the civilians. The Minister of Justice of Ukraine, Denis Maluska, said, within the lack of the draft card, the Ukrainians will be denied in registration and divorce, as well as other civil acts. And what are they? These are birth, death, and I think many not so relevant, for example, the change of the name. But birth and death, what can they do about it? Will they be denied of it? By the way, these are the registration of the property. Everything is frozen, everything is suspended. If a person is not enrolled in these lists which should go to the tomb, the notary services, international legal aid, it will be denied. If this person, for example, did not update its information, unprecedented mobilization triggers discontent among population and warms up hatred. There are more and more attacks on military commissaries, beatings, and arsons. Many can say that this is quite logic. They do everything to inflict a defeat to us. It seems that this internal civil confrontation in Ukraine, we must rejoice, should have rejoiced. And maybe according to the Western logic, that is the case. But we understand that the Kiev regime acts contrary to the interests of its people and does not defend its national interests, maybe which are something in common with us. No, they're just processing and making money sent by the West to them. let me remind you the words from the Western countries when the pandemic started. It was suffering. There were sufferings to us, and the vaccine to us, this was an occasion, and we wanted to share it in order to engage everyone to produce it together. And for them, it was a kind of a possibility, and I quote, the leading Western public figures to reduce population. I think it does not fit. I think it fits the logic of Zelensky, the concept of liberal Democrats and Zelensky and all them who made an oath to them to reduce population of the earth. I think that is true. This is a very deadly technique they resort to, because they do it against their own people. The Third Reich acted against those whom it considered aliens and not equal to them. The Kiev regime went even further. These techniques are being used against their own people. But in the words they speak that these are their people. That such incidents are being fixed in Dnipropetrovsk, Odessa, Kiev, and other cities. People do not want to become a cannon fodder. They flee. In order to catch all those who run, an additional troops of army were allocated. But years will go, and ethnic civilians of Ukraine will understand what they went through. And as soon as they understand, the more they can preserve their lives for themselves and for their future generations. I think, and let me quote, to be very Evangelion, and I would like to quote Bible, a gospel. By seeing they do not see, and by understanding they do not understand. But the explanation was what Jesus Christ was talking to people with the tales, that by seeing they do not see, and by hearing they do not hear, and by understanding they do not understand. It was written down 2,000 years ago. That is the modern interpretation of the words. Everything is telling. And such a scourge came to each family, but they consider being unaware of what is happening. And this army of the Kiev regime, who was sent to Moldavia, Hungary, and Slovakia, received a blank check, even to shoot to kill. All those who go to Ukraine, you think? No, to those who flee. Shot to kill. All those who went abroad from Ukraine do not want to return. It is known that Germany provided asylum to the Symphonic Orchestra of Kiev. 2/3 of them, these are men of conscript age, 73 people, and with their families, 130 people, received accommodation in Heim am Rhein, and they will stay in Germany for the next 3 years. I think these administration, the Western administration, they were told that they flee from Russia, but in fact, this is not true. Let me remind you, in 2022, why the Russian diplomats were expelled from Poland? Because the considerable part of them from Ukraine tried through Poland to come to Russia, and that is why the Polish authorities ordered to accept everyone, even without passports, but to make them leave the country, even if they go further, and they cannot return to Russia. But nevertheless, people managed to do so through Kaliningrad, Belarus. But the Russian diplomats, why they were expelled? So that they could not help them and assist them in helping to flee from regime, so that they could not receive support from our diplomats. But nevertheless, our diplomats helped in remote mode and did everything they could do to help people to come to Russia. Right now, through all this time, now we see the evidence. The Ukrainian citizens flee their own government, their own president. Oppressive measures does not help Zelensky. His mobilization plan is being hotly implemented, and this triggers fugitives, and it can reach about 200,000 people. In order to make order in the army, a military police is being established with extended powers. I think it is not the police. The police should act according to law, and its main function is maintaining the order. And when it comes to this police, it implements the functions, some invented functions. In fact, they use inhumane techniques. This new subdivision in the police of Ukraine is completely under control of Zelensky. Its law, the law and its establishment was accepted on June 21st in the first reading. There is another side of the word. They believe that the main reason for the military police is another, but these are interrelated. The fact is, in Ukraine, people are starting to ask questions about legitimacy of Zelensky.
And hence, those in the bunker are afraid that these people with their discontent would provoke massive riots or uprisings, and the Ukrainians would flee from the front, thus collapsing the front. So the Maidan story was imposed on Ukraine very well. It has been rehearsed a couple of times, so they know what things they fear. As they are afraid of this prospect, they do not connect their future with the grateful citizens, because they know what the citizens will do to them. What I have just described again confirms the relevance of the tasks of the special military operation, as has been declared by the Russian leadership. All of them will definitely be accomplished. To give you several more facts, following the commands from Washington, South Korean and Romanian authorities are more and more involved in the supplies of arms. In Seoul and Bucharest, they are forgetting their national interest, and they are also forgetting the implications against against the backdrop of unprecedented escalation in Asia and other countries, and in Europe. They are totally sprinkling false assurances, ignoring growing social economic problems that widely use their taxpayers' money to support the Kiev regime. Recently, it was announced that the Romanian side agreed to Washington's demand to transfer to Ukraine one of the expensive Patriot anti-aircraft missile systems previously purchased from the Americans. The supply of South Korean howitzers, worth almost $1 billion, is doomed from the outset to turn into a contribution paid out of Romanian pockets to delay the imminent defeat of the Ukrainian armed forces now in Ukraine, and all kinds of manipulations. On the 12th of June, the UN Security Council saw a report of the UN Secretary General on Children and Armed Conflict for 2023. It includes many sections. It considers multiple situations, but there is also the Ukrainian section. It is characterized by positive changes in the overall statistics on children. 543 victims are mentioned compared to 1,482 last year. At the same time, the UN Secretary General positively notes Russia's, and I quote him, practical preventive measures to protect minors, and as well as, and I quote again, continued engagements of the government of the Russian Federation with the special representative of the UN Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict to prevent grave violations against children. At the same time, the change in the structure of the list of parties committing grave violations against children next to the report is noteworthy. Previously, its sections included parties taking measures to protect children's rights, which included Russia, and parties not acting in this area. The current version implies only two categories: state and non-state actors. The Russian side, accordingly, is characterized as a state actor. We are not surprised that the Kiev regime tried to take advantage of the change in the structure of the UN Secretary General's report by circulating in the UN Security Council a commentary by its foreign ministry which expresses satisfaction with Russia's absence among the parties taking measures to protect children's rights and unjustifiably attributes inaction in the protection of children's rights. I want to put the record straight. Our experts analyzed the documents, and we would like to say the following. Firstly, due to the change in the structure of the report, there is no longer a section with the document indicating the parties taking measures to protect children's rights. If we follow the rationale of the Kiev regime, then there are no longer any countries taking measures to protect children's rights. So when as Zelensky said, the Ukraine diplomacy became more impudent. It became also very stupid. I don't know for whom, maybe for their own people. Secondly, the Ukrainian insinuations are refuted by Mr. Guterres himself, who noted in the document cooperativeness shown by the Russian side in this area. Thirdly, the allegation of Moscow's inaction is also false. The Presidential Ombudsman for Children's Rights, Ms. Volobelova, is doing a great deal of work on this front. She provided interview and the footage is available on the website and on social media. This month, she presented another consolidated bulletin on the activities of the Institute of Ombudsperson for Children's Rights in protecting the rights of minors during the special military operation. It contains information on measures to support families with children and children's social institutions, minors in need for medical care, rehabilitation, neglected children, orphans, and children left without parental care. The document also devotes considerable attention to the Commission of work to reunite families separated as a result of hostilities and to refute misleading information. Anyone wishing, including the Ukrainian side, considering that they have been very active in the UN Security Council and also the Secretary General, anyone can read the English version of the document, which is available online. We will not allow anyone to manipulate the specifics of the presentation by the United Nations Secretariat of its data, including on children and the armed conflict. Another global topic. We received a lot of questions asking us to comment on what was said during the meeting between the Russian president and the Russian foreign minister on the 14th of June. We processed all the questions we received, and the main essence was to explain the initiative of the Russian president to build a new continental security architecture in Eurasia. So we would like to comment on all these questions that we received. We regret to say that the Euro-Atlantic security system that had been in detail covered by the states and satellites, although they created it originally, everything they would touch would corrode sooner or later. For decades they have pursued a provocative policy for military and political development of the territories adjacent to our border, pushed NATO's military infrastructure eastward, and then unleashed a hybrid war against us. Today, the West openly speaks of the need to, and I quote the doctrinal documents, inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. They take attempts to build a non-inclusive security system at the expense of others, that is, directed in general against our country. At the same time, Washington and Brussels are stirring up hotbeds of tension in other parts of Eurasia, including in the Middle East, in the Asia-Pacific region. Behind this is nothing but a desire to maintain their dominance. They are obsessed with, either elusive or they never had from day one. It is of no importance. It's for political scientists or historians to decide. There is no longer such dominance, but they try to maintain the feeling of being dominant by turning the entire continent into an arena of geopolitical confrontation, imposing new dividing lines and imposing Cold War bloc mentality, but the main part by setting parties on one another at these dividing lines. But it is not our intention to be drawn into new bloc confrontation in the spirit of zero-sum games, as is stated in the paragraph 54 of the foreign policy concept of the Russian Federation, approved by the President of March on the 31st of March 2023, and I quote this document directly: Russia seeks to transform Eurasia into a single continental space of peace, stability, mutual trust, development, and prosperity. This provision establishes a normative framework for building Eurasian architecture of security and cooperation. In his address to the Federal Assembly on the 29th of February 2024, the President of the Russian Federation pointed out the need to intensify efforts in order to create, in the near future, an equal and indivisible security circuit in Eurasia. And he also expressed his readiness for a substantive conversation on this topic with all interested countries and associations. On June 14, 2024, at the meeting with the heads of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Vladimir Putin outlined the main elements and parameters of Russian initiatives. We're talking about establishing a constructive, mutually respectful dialogue between all potential participants of the future security system in Greater Eurasia. We proceed from the assumption that geographical proximity and being on the same continent prompts us to search together ways for peaceful coexistence. Such a system should be open to all Eurasian countries should they wish to participate in it, including Western European countries, provided that they abandon their confrontational policy. The President of Russia mentioned that it may look unrealistic nowadays, but he set the goal. Well, the realistic nature of these mandates. This mandate has been made realistic by the fact that the Euro-Atlantic security system that is covered by the OSCE space, it failed. Should we start a new system of security, we would lose skills of dialogue, we would lose the aspects that were destroyed by hegemonic aspirations of the West. It would result in issues that would be more difficult to cope with in the future if we don't do so now. Another important area of the effort is the broad involvement of interstate associations as a in Eurasia and the integration of the achievements in relevant areas. We're talking about the CSTO, CIS, SCO, EAU, Conference on Interaction and Confidence Building Measure in Asia, ASEAN, the Cooperation Council for the Arab States of the Persian Gulf, Arab League. Many of these associations deal with the collective security of their members in relevant spheres. Hence, it is necessary to establish direct ties between them as well as the practical interaction. States and regional entities should themselves determine the areas of cooperation and improve the system of institutions, mechanisms, and arrangements that serve to achieve a common goal. At the same time, economic, social welfare, integration, and mutual beneficial cooperation should be an important part of the joint work. Now, turning to realistic aspect. If the world humanity in the 40s, when it was on fire, when the globe was on fire because of the terror of World War II, the Great Patriotic War to us. If anyone had told them that several years after the globe, different nukes of the world would see decolonization, nations that were oppressed for centuries would gain sovereignty, independence, that would have caused tears in spite of laughter. Tears because there were many things to deplore, and laugh because it looked like a myth, would have looked like a myth back in the day, but still it prevailed, it succeeded. There have been a lot of decolonization processes, and tens of countries gained freedom they could not even dream of, not because they were colonies, but because they were slaves. These are different things. In some parts of the world it were colonies, some were slave markets that were used to sell families, and some the most fit one were picked from families as resources, and they were sent to ensure the prosperity of the West. Back in the day, this mission looked beyond impossible, illusional, if I may, but it did come out, thanks to the victory of the Soviet Union in the Great Patriotic War, or World War II, and the political capital that the Soviet Union earned as a victory country. It invested this capital not in its own exclusiveness and domination as opposed to the West, but instead in the freedom of those who could not dream of such freedom. These are similar processes. The sooner the understanding of this trend dawns on everyone, the quicker will we attain the goals planned. We're not talking about building a political organization, a military alliance, or another bloc entity. We're talking about building a system of interaction on the basis of complementary multi-level agreements with a varying membership. As you can see, things become more complicated in the world, or rather more complex in terms of new opportunities, less primitive, more sophisticated. Well, I mean, this is not a simple system that we propose. It is not a simple piece of architecture. Probably could be compared to a 3D model. It's not a planar work, but a voluminous piece of work. But there is no other more interesting goal that would truly meet the values that were categorized by humanity as such. None of such goal exists nowadays. What do we have on the other side of the coin? Domination of, or rather, what do we have on the other cup of the balance? Domination of the exclusive. No, this will not happen. This architecture will not be against anyone. Its parameters will make it possible not only to ensure durable peace, but also to avoid major geopolitical upheavals as a result of a crisis, globalization based on Western models. It will create reliable military and political guarantees to protect both Russia and other countries of the macro region from external threats. It will create a conflict-free and development-friendly space and eliminate the destabilizing influence of extra-regional stakeholders on Eurasian processes. In the long term, it will mean that the phasing out of the military presence of external powers in Eurasia. I would like to use several examples here too. Like Tsiolkovsky considered back in the day about space flights. Those around him could not even believe this. What kind of breakthrough mentality he had decades after it came true in the form of the first step of the first Russian Sputnik, first living beings being sent into outer space, human being sent to outer space, a human being entering outer space, and we do not even realize now that a lot of communications that are taking place